bringing the world together. World War I began in 1914, and in 1915, the United States, who were not yet involved, lent France and Great Britain $500 million through American banks. In 1916, a single French loan totaled $750 million. In all, the total amount of the loans to these Allied countries amounted to $3 billion, plus another $6 billion for exports, none of which were repaid. This was just one of the reasons for America's entry into the war. Had Germany won, those bonds held by American bankers would have been worthless. J.P. Morgan, who served as England's financial agent in the U.S., Rockefeller, who made more than $200 million on the war, Warburg, and Schiff, were instrumental in pushing America into the war, so they could protect their loans to Europe. The Illuminati-controlled newspapers publicized and played up the sinking of the British auxiliary cruiser, the Lusitania, which was torpedoed by a German U-boat on May 7, 1915. The Germans said they had the right to attack an Allied ship, even though the United States, up to that time, had been neutral. The Lusitania, which had been converted into an ammunition warship early in the war, was armed with guns, and was carrying 6 million pounds of ammunition, which were to be sold to England and France for use in the war against Germany. It was illegal for American passengers to be on board a ship carrying munitions, and on May 1, 1915, the German embassy in Washington, D.C., ran ads in the New York papers, in addition to verbal announcements, warning Americans that the ship would be attacked. 3 months earlier, Germany had issued a proclamation that the waters around the British Isles were part of the war zone. In addition, it was later revealed that on December 14, 1914, British intelligence broke the German war code, which meant that the First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, knew the location of every U-boat in the English Channel area. When the ship was sunk off the coast of Ireland, 1,201 people were killed, including 128 Americans. The Illuminati used the incident to create a war fever, portraying the Germans as being barbaric. Because of President Wilson's handling of the Lusitania affair, William Jennings Bryan, his Secretary of State, resigned. Colonel House was already in England, making firm commitments that America would enter the war, and on April 6, 1917, Congress declared war, selling it as a war to end all wars, and a war to make the world safe for democracy. When the war was finally over 63,000 American soldiers had been killed in the fighting. A year later, in 1919, Lenin offered 4/5 of Soviet territory, in exchange for the formal recognition of his communist government, and economic aid from the United States. He offered to accept the creation of Allied-sponsored non-communist states in the Baltic region, in the area of Archangel, western Byelorussia, half of the Ukraine, Crimea, the Caucasus, the Ural Mountains, and all of Siberia. Wilson rejected the offer for patriotic reasons, because the Illuminati had big plans for that country. Had he accepted the offer, Russia would have never have become a world power. The League of Nations before World War I, the Illuminati, using various influential groups in the United States and Great Britain, urged the creation of an organization to promote world peace, even though George Washington warned against involvement with foreign nations. President Wilson favored the idea, and echoed those sentiments in his famous Peace Without Victory speech before the Senate. He proposed his idea of a League of Nations to the Senate in 1917, seeing it as a means of preventing another world war. It would provide collective security, or in other words, an attack on one would be considered an attack on all. The League would also help in the arbitration of international disputes, the reduction of armaments, and the development of open diplomacy. The armistice ending World War I on November 11, 1918, was negotiated on the basis of Wilson's 14 points, and on June 28, 1919, was included in the Treaty of Versailles, a 20-year truce which divided up Europe, setting the stage for World War II. It demanded that Germany pay war reparations to the victorious countries. The Allies maintained that since Germany was responsible for the war, she was liable for the costs and damages incurred by the victors. This amount was set at $32 billion, plus interest, which called for annual payments of $500 million, plus a 26% surcharge on exports. The agreement forced Germany to forfeit some of her prime provinces, colonies, and natural resources. They signed away their rights, had to make trade concessions, and lost what property they had in those foreign countries. The treaty was widely criticized. David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister of England, said, "We have written a document that guarantees war in 20 years. When you place conditions on a people, Germany, that it cannot possibly keep, you force it to either breach the agreement or to war. Either we modify that agreement, and make it tolerable to the German people, or when the new generation comes along they will try again." Lord Curzon, the British Foreign Secretary, said, "This is no peace, this is only a truce for 20 years. Even President Wilson was reported to have said, "If I were a German, I think I should never sign it." The The League of Nations was signed and sealed at the Paris Peace Conference. Even though the United States was represented by Wilson, Colonel House was calling the shots. Bernard Baruch, who, as head of the War Industries Board, made about $200 million for himself, was also in the American delegation at the Paris Conference, as well as Walter Lippmann, who later became a syndicated newspaper columnist, Allen Dulles, who was appointed director of the CIA in 1951, John Foster Dulles, brother of Allen, who later became the Secretary of State under Eisenhower, and Christian Herter, who became Secretary of State after the death of Dulles. English Prime Minister George was accompanied by Sir Philip Sassoon, a member of the British Privy Council and a direct descendant of Amschel Rothschild. Georges Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister, had at his side his advisor, Georges Mandel, also known as Jeroboam Rothschild. The citizens of the United States refused to accept the League of Nations because they felt it would draw them into future European conflicts. Frank B. Kellogg, who in 1925 became Secretary of State under Coolidge, inspired by the American outlawry of war movement, and supported by those who were disappointed at the failure of the United States to enter the League, proposed a pact to the French Foreign Minister, Aristide Briand, in the spring of 1927. Its purpose was to create alliances directed against a possible resurgence of German aggression. This Pact of Paris was signed on August 27, 1928, by 65 nations, who promised to settle all international disputes by peaceful means. Because of the efforts of Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, who saw through Wilson's plan, the United States didn't join the League, and in 1921, made a separate peace treaty with Germany and Austria. The League of Nations, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, throughout the 1920s, gained new members, and helped settle minor international disputes. However, weakened by the failure of the United States to join, and the restlessness of nations who were not satisfied, such as Japan, Italy, and Germany, the Illuminati's second attempt at establishing a one-world government failed. The League had little impact on international affairs, and ceased to exist in 1946 when the United Nations was established. What the League of Nations did do, was allow the Illuminati to get more of a grip on world finances. Countries which belonged to the League sought financial aid from the United States, wherein Rockefeller said that no country could get a loan unless the international bankers controlled the bank. If they had no bank, they were able to set one up. Through the Bank for International Settlement, established in 1930, the Illuminati was able to control more of the world's money.